Hi, I'm Jared Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. I've talked about this on the show before, but I'm always interested in the designers, the architects, the creative people whose work fits together into some sort of larger project. There's some sort of intellectual through line that connects an otherwise diverse set of projects, so that when you zoom out and examine the body of work, there's a relationship between them, an evolution in thinking that can be tracked, a range of outputs that explore similar questions. And I think the thing that interests me about this is how those ideas, how those questions, those inquiries translate into form, translate into objects, translate into things that have been designed. How do intellectual investigations manifest themselves in a building or a graphic gesture or a painting or whatever? I was thinking about this again while reading and looking through Buildings for People and Plants, the new monograph by WorkAC, the New York-based architecture studio founded in 2003 by Amale, Andraos, and Dan Wood. This book felt to me like an attempt to weave together the studio's interests and show how they are applied to a range of projects. Even the title, Buildings for People and Plants, hints at some of the questions that the studio is exploring. The projects of WorkAC are diverse, ranging from small interiors to public projects to urban scale thinking, but they're all rooted in this idea that a building should do more than one thing, that you need to find some sort of civic or cultural dimension that can be embedded into any project. And looking through the book, I got really curious about how Amale and Dan think about this, how they think about their own intellectual investigations, how they think about the civic potential of a project, and the formal exploration that is so present in their projects. And so I invited them on the show to talk about the new book, to talk about this body of work, and to talk about their practice generally. In addition to practicing, they're both educators. Dan has taught most recently at Columbia GSAPP and Yale, and Amale is a professor at Columbia, where she also served as dean from 2014 to 2021. In addition to this new book, they've published a lot of books. They published We'll Get There When We Cross That Bridge, which is a conversation and monograph of the studio's output, the research project 49 Cities, and Above the Pavement, The Farm, a small paperback book that documents the process of their truly seminal 2008 project PF1, this experimental temporary garden at MoMA PS1. In this conversation, we talk about all of those things. We talk about the threads that drive their practice and how this manifests itself in what they call pop architecture. We talk about how a building is still a site rich for exploration across scales, and why that 2008 project PF1 was such a turning point in their practice. We also talk about books and why they find publishing to be a rich space to work alongside their architectural work, and how teaching, especially during Amale's tenure as dean at Columbia, has influenced the studio. I'm a longtime fan of WorkAC and really admire the way Amale and Dan think and talk about their work, and it was a pleasure to be in dialogue with them here. Just a reminder, if you like the show, if you like what we do here, if you want to see more of it, you can support our work by joining our Substack. We have a monthly newsletter that is free for everybody, but we also have a paid tier that gets you a bonus interview every month and all sorts of other bonus content. I want this show to feel like you're listening to a great conversation in a coffee shop. So the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help us do this work. You can help us make more of these episodes and have more of these conversations. I truly can't do it without you. But now, Amale, Andraos, Dan Wood, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jared. We're super happy and excited to be speaking with you today.
Just published this new book called Buildings for People and Plants. And I actually want to start at the end of that book, if we can, because at the end of that book, you have this really nice conversation with the curator and museum director, Heidi Zuckerman. And you have this line in there that I feel like explains a lot of your work. You say, as an artist, you're pursuing a set of questions through different works and different times to create a body of work. We also have a set of questions that we explore from one project to the next. There's a thread or a series of threads that we try to make room for. I'm wondering if we can talk about what those threads are, or if you could articulate the kind of the questions that you feel like bring your body of work together, or the questions that drive your range of projects.
I'm also trying to think uh, why or when did this idea that architecture was a could be a kind of lens through
Mm-hmm.
which examine other things started. I don't know how,
Did we ever talk about
we
it?
never really talked about it, but well, in fairness,
I find that hard to believe.
um, uh, we talked about it a bit more. Let's start there. I think we talked about it, but more in reaction.
uh,
At the time of starting the office, and maybe it's because we were coming out of OMA,
mm-hmm.
or we took it for granted that obviously architecture is about the world, or,
Yeah.
and there was a sort of, we landed in New York, a generic city, and we realized, hey, this is not a shared idea. In fact,
Mm.
there's the resistance to that idea. It was a time where you still had kind of leftover of, I don't know, autonomy or whatever, Eisenman. There was
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
still a very, in America, still a very formal exploration. And we were like, what? Or maybe they were like, what do you mean? Like, what kind of office are you starting? That's
Yeah.
like, uh, and so I think we took it was almost in reaction, or we were put in that position of explaining why is it that you think architecture is about, should be about the world, and it took us a little bit by surprise, but we realized that it's a position, in fact, not a
Right.
given. So I think it started there, and so the first project that really was about that is Public Farm One.
Yeah. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Don't worry. I have
Yeah,
a bunch of
yeah,
questions about that.
Yeah, but I think, I mean,
yeah.
so what you're saying, I think you're saying like that this idea that architecture is about wider culture in the world is one of the things that makes the body of work, or that is the body of work is that
No, I think
so
no, it's not. The body of work is the body of work, and it's a
right,
set of
right,
inquiries, uh,
outside of architecture.
and inside. I mean,
Right.
some of them are about, I don't know, the envelope, or things that we've obsessed about architecturally, and
Yeah.
I think other aspects are about the world.
Right, because I think it's interesting to answer that question with that answer because I think for a long time we felt that the way we did things did not lead to a body of work. It just led to a lot of interesting ideas and fun projects, and we didn't really care what the next one looked like, and kind of
Mm-hmm.
secretly probably hoped it was totally different. And I think we did get a lot of flack
Yeah,
early on that, oh, you can't do that kind of, curvy project because you guys do angly
square
project,
project.
square project or whatever. So I do think, it's funny because now this idea that there is a body of work and it is something that's only come very slowly. And in fact, I think that's the difference between this book and the previous book is that,
Yeah.
this one, it's all about the projects and what's in the projects
Yeah.
and how what's in the projects maybe carries from one to the next, and that you're just looking at 10 things, not 10,000 things like in the previous book. And so I do think it's kind of like this is a very recent development.
Let me ask you this, and tell me if I'm projecting
Sure,
too
sure.
much onto your answer. But when I think about what you just said, what I'm what I'm interested in is that the thing that coheres the body of work is not necessarily formal or even programmatic, but intellectual. And so it's a set of investigations, or I think you use the word questions or inquiries. And I think that's one piece of it, and that makes sense to me. I think if I can now connect this to the first part of the book, where you talk about how you want your projects to do more than one thing, you think
Yeah.
about this kind of communal or civic potential is the phrase that you used, and I'm kind of curious. Are the studio's intellectual investigations, are the studio's formal investigations, how do those connect to this communal or civic potential? It seems to me there's this kind of layering of interests that happen in your body of work. There's the investigations, the inquiry, the questions, the your own kind of personal interests and ideas. Then there is the specific project. What can this project do in this space? How can this project become a civic project? How do those start to connect? And then there are a set of aesthetic formal investigations on top of that. Can you kind of just talk to me about that relationship? Because I find, again, I'm sorry to keep going back to this body of work question, but I find this really interesting because I feel like you can cut your body of work into these kind of different intersections. And I'm wondering how you both think about that, or if you even do think about that.
It's kind of a nested series of interests, or I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we've been asked that question. Maybe we'll start with the aesthetic. Let's say we've been asked that question relative to some of the forms or shapes, and we've been asked that question. The most obvious is our use of color, right? This is always like, wow,
Yeah.
why why do you use color? Like,
Yeah.
and so on a very kind of basic, gut aesthetic level, I think we have this kind of, I don't know why we share this kind of pop sensibility, Dan and I, but we do.
Mm-hmm.
And for very different reasons, in terms of the kinds of environment we grew up in, or our interests growing up. And that is a kind of intersection. Like, I think we have a way of, like, we really have a joy of color, and for us, so that kind of very aesthetic sort of like kind of interest, let's say, uh, kind of sort of is nested,
Yeah.
or for
Yeah.
us, there is an idea about generosity or communication or accessibility with
Yeah.
color that I think is shared. I mean, there's a reason why the American postmodernists started to use color, because
Yeah.
it was like what
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
love, and I mean, it sounds a bit reductive, but there is a sort of life is in color, like Dan says, the world is in color. Like, why are we obsessed with white and
Right.
whiteness?
Right.
And then there's this bigger idea, right? That it isn't just white. It isn't just pure, kind of detached from the world. It isn't whiteness. Isn't like there's a kind of a much bigger sort of
Yeah.
idea on top of it, which is architects should not use color. Like, there's this kind of like, right,
Mm-hmm.
because you have this idea, this, about something that is abstract and outside of life. And so I think that is an example of something that is really very simple, and
Yeah.
yet I think is multi-layered in the reasons, not how, but why, we use color. So I think that's maybe a good place to, and I find that with time, um, the inquiries that have stayed are those that have these multiple levels, right? Like,
Yeah.
food is fun. Yeah, but food is also like,
Right.
another way to understand, and it's like a multi, and it's all these layers, and it's amazing because um, it really adds a kind of then the work can live on many levels and be approached by many different people in many different ways. And
Yeah, I think that approachability, I think it also just can go back simply to this idea that architecture is in the world,
Yeah.
right? And think that so many architects complain that people don't understand architecture, that they don't think about architecture, but the fact is that people are in architecture all the time. Like, no
Right.
question. People love their houses and people love, many buildings. So, and I think, just by acknowledging that architecture is in the world and that it is a populist thing, forces this issue of the civic, right? Because it's there, it's in the city, it's like, unless you're doing a fortress or an embassy or, like something, there's always going to be some interaction between the building and the inside and the outside is kind of how we like to think about it, even if it's in the middle of nowhere. Like, there is always this kind of, it's always going out. So
I actually think pop and pop architecture
Mm.
was like the like skeleton key to your work that I was actually trying to understand. As soon as you said that, you have this great line in your last book, we'll get there when we cross that bridge. You say pop is a way to attract as large an audience as possible to broaden architecture's public. I think that's what you're saying. Like that actually, like pop is that intersection between your kind of cultural investigations, the civic potential, and then also the expressive use of color. Like
Yeah.
all of that all comes together in this idea of pop. Can you? I know, Amal, you just said like you're not sure why you're both interested in this, but is there a lineage there? Where does this interested in pop uh, comes from? Because it seems like that was there from
It
the
was there
beginning of the
before.
studio. Yeah.
Yeah, it was there from the start. Honestly, it's a I don't know. I have an idea a little bit.
yeah, I mean, I was into pop. Like, I did a poor pop self-portrait that we have,
Yeah, yeah.
I was into
Dan was into pop. Dan was into pop. He has an amazing self-portrait with like the skinny tie
I
and the,
love it.
like
It's kind of Roy Lichtenstein meets
Yeah.
postmodernism.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I think for me, I think I grew up in a house and where, I mean, my father is a painter and an
Mhm.
architect, and my mother loves beautiful objects, and there was a kind of love of color and objects, and I mean, it's like uh, it was, there were some very strong Memphis color phases. So I think that for me comes from a little bit that like happy moments in in the family are connected to these kinds of environments. So I think that's yeah, color is like very fundamental to me. It's like from a child that
right.
Um, so I think we intersected on that level. Um, and I think there's another layer uh, to pop, which is this question of representation or cultural representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we've also been interested in, uh, and uh, and pop has been such a smarter way to do it
Yeah.
than the kind of cliche, reductive architect ways of,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, here's a new
Yeah.
city in the desert. Let's make the solar panels look like palm trees. And like, like architects are so bad sometimes at
Yeah.
kind of capturing or like so unfunny and unsmart and like
Mm-hmm.
pop culture's ability to capture a place, a moment, a context, a people is like zip zip, and like in
Yeah.
three things, the connections are at such a high level, and I think architects fail often there. And so
I think
there's this
that's right.
that
Yeah.
I think is interesting to think about. Can architecture be smarter in addressing these questions of context and yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up pop earlier. I actually had a note at the end here of like, if we have time, I want to ask you about this idea of pop architecture. And I feel like this is actually going to shape the entire conversation. So I don't know if that's a good or bad for you. Um, I want to ask you one other question about this new book, or the framing of the new book before we get into
Where
some
are the
specific.
plants?
We'll get to that too. We'll get to that. But so I looked at the new book and I went back and I reread we'll get there when we cross that bridge after looking at the new book to prepare for this conversation. And I was struck by the the kind of the trajectory of the studio, the trajectory of the practice. And what I was really interested in was the way you both approach scale, or the changing in scale of your work. And so much of your early work was interiors, were these small spaces, renovations inside buildings that couldn't be changed on the outside. Dan, you already mentioned this sort of inside outside idea. And then your work scaled up very quickly. You're thinking about urbanism, you're thinking about cities, you engage in this long 49 cities project. And then this book is like very clearly situated in the middle. This feel like, as the title said, like I'm actually interested in that word buildings in the
Yeah.
title.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about how operating at those two scales, the kind of the small scale of the interior and the large scale of the city or urbanism, how does that actually come back into that sort of middle scale? I don't know what to call that. That
Yeah,
like
yeah,
in
that's good.
between
Yeah,
of the building. Tell me about how those start to talk to each
yeah,
other or influence each other.
yeah,
So you're saying in the end we end up with medium-sized plans, even
yeah.
though we said we were not going to we were going to make no medium-sized plans.
That's right.
Well, I mean, there's scale, and like to be clear, not to
Yeah,
oversimplify, there's a range of scale of these buildings too. But
But
I,
it's
this
yeah,
idea of buildings, I actually think is really
yeah.
interesting.
yeah.
Well, I think if if you start with the idea that buildings are never objects, right, that are sort of isolated from their context, but that they are completely porous and perforated. And uh, I think in the end, I think at the end of we'll get there, we felt, let's just draw the frame, right, around one scale, is the scale
Mhm.
that architecture has tended to deal with. And we will capture, like, but the idea is not to give up
Right.
capturing the large and the small. It's just setting a frame so that you could at least work at that, at that. It's a little bit like the way I always thought about it. I think we thought, it's like a plate, right? I mean, come back to
Mm,
food, right? A plate is, organizes your kind of different food in a certain way. There's a composition, etc. But the food is coming from everywhere. It has multiple
yeah.
stories, and
Yeah.
then the taste, and so it's just a frame. And I I feel like it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's closed. It just means that it allows you to compare things and look at things always at that scale. And I think there's a bit also, again, a reaction where when we started, we wanted to blow up this idea that we were supposed to just occupy that scale.
Right.
And we are at a moment, or where you go to any school and very few are looking at buildings, and we're like, okay, guys,
Yeah.
Right. We thought at least we had buildings,
Yeah.
like at least
Yeah. Yeah.
buildings.
you don't want to throw the baby and the bathwater it's like there's nothing left.
Hmm.
And the kids are lost. I mean, they're just, and it's a little bit like you don't have to give up the ideas and the activism and the not, it's just you want to talk about energy. It's impossible to talk about it at multiple scales at the same time.
Right.
I don't care how genius you are.
Right.
Like, let's try to see what comes in and comes out of this frame. And, you know, uh, yeah. So it's, yeah.
I mean, it's almost like tell me if this is not what you're saying, or if this is a misinterpretation. But I think what's really interesting about what you just said is that the building can become a site for all of these other
Yeah.
concerns and
Definitely.
interests. And so what you're doing is you're not not thinking about urbanism, you're not thinking about ecology, you're not thinking about interiors, but you're actually taking lessons and research and ideas from those and then actually bringing them back into this form that is the architectural form, that is
And
the building.
yeah, and seeing how the two things intersect,
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
where
Like, I mean, I feel like there's two projects in the book that, Miami has more to say about cities and about public space and about engagement than, most parks or,
yeah,
urban
yeah,
plans. And it's like, it's not even public, it's a
yeah,
private thing. It's just a parking garage. And so I do think I mean, we did want people to see that,
right.
all the stuff that can be in that frame and not, not get too nervous about it or whatever. I think also, Mission Rock, which is a very
mm,
forward office building in many ways, it's really a developer project, our biggest, one of our only developer projects. And yet it kind of like it has a full-on sewage treatment plant at its heart.
right.
So cool. And we tried, we tried as much as we could to like expose that. But anyway, I think it doesn't really matter if people know it or not. I think there's something in there that's, it's just so futuristic and forward-looking and progressive and San Francisco, and it's kind of like
Yeah,
it
And,
it is another expansion, I guess.
and that's not to negate, it's not an either or. You
right.
can engage with these questions and engage with the questions that buildings ask, for themselves. Like there's also expertise in building making that ideally architects wouldn't lose
Right.
or give up to the hundred of consultants that now you're supposed to have on your team because I don't know, somehow we're no longer able to do anything
Yeah.
according to clients. I mean, that's the other side is also like making sure we're not just losing territory constantly to,
Uh,
I mean, that's a different, but it's also part of the project is everything has gotten so specialized and everything requires its expertise and this and that. And in the end, you know, it's, it's, it's not great. I feel like architects used to do a lot of that.
yeah. And I mean, I think that actually goes back to that first question about the kind of the intellectual ideas that bring together a body of work. I think that is the purview of the architect also, not the engineer, the contractor, and again, not to silo these, but I think that's what, that's how that starts to get
And,
expansive again.
and in a way, what happened by reducing architecture to form is that we lost a lot of knowledge and capacities and these other sort of aspects of buildings, right?
Right.
The book is not called Architecture for People and Plants. It's buildings for people and
Right.
plants because I
Right.
think we would like to reclaim that, for architecture.
I actually want to take what's going to seem like a turn, but I'm going to connect it back to what we're talking about because I actually think this is a nice place to talk about PF1 or Public Farm 1 because I think there's clear through lines from the Miami Garage, for example, to things you're exploring in that project. And I know you mentioned it already. I know you've talked about it a lot. I'm hoping we can kind of talk about it from some slightly different angles. It was also the first project of your, it's what put you on my radar. Um, Years ago. This is a project you did at MoMA PS1 in 2008, part of the Young Architects program. And that project to me, in again, kind of thinking about your body of work, both feels like at that point in your careers, it feels like a distillation of a lot of the things you were thinking about and investigating. And then in retrospect, also feels like a turning point in the practice. It feels like it opened up a bunch of different things. It feels like it's this linchpin in the studio. Very briefly, just before we get into some specific questions for listeners who have not are not familiar with PF1, can you just give a kind of high level overview of what the project was and what you were kind of interested in with the project?
Sure. It was a kind of temporary summer pavilion at MoMA where it was a big deal competition. It doesn't exist anymore. The requirements for the competition were shade, water and seating.
Yeah.
Seating. Someplace to sit, someplace to be in shade, and some water element
To cool.
to cool. Yeah. So almost no requirements. And at the time, we were very interested in a lot of things that weren't those three things. And we had just read Michael Pollan's Omnivore's
Right.
Dilemma. We had just started the research for 49 cities, and we're really interested in visionary urbanism.
Mhm.
So, and we thought it would be really fun to do a visionary urbanist urban farm. Kind of our original idea was like, why don't we do like a super studio of farm floating over the
Yeah.
pavilion, and maybe that'll give some, I mean, maybe floating over the museum, and maybe that'll give some shade, I think. And then, so that was our first idea. We rapidly realized that floating farms are extremely heavy and expensive. We had to build this ourselves. And so we kind of broke the floating urban farm in half so that half of it now sat on the ground, reducing the weight by half, and decided to make it out of cardboard tubes so that it could be recycled. And so it became this kind of cardboard tube farm installation that also had lots of other stuff. It was entirely solar powered, that ran all the pumps for the water. We grew 51 different types of fruits and vegetables. It had a pool in the middle of it. We had chickens running around the museum all summer long.
It was just a great system of drip irrigation.
We had almost 300
lightweight
people.
soil,
Yeah.
recycled polystyrene, and I think it was for us it was a proof that architecture could bring together many different things and many different people.
Yeah, we even went to Rikers Island. We met chefs. On Rikers Island, there's a rehabilitative program for people to learn how to be gardeners. And so people who graduated from that program took care of the plants during the summer. I mean, it was just, yeah, incredible experience.
But it was our idea about what architecture could be, because I think for some people it wasn't architecture, right? It was like something else. But for us, it became, this is what we would like our architecture to do or to be, is to try to, we can try to bring a lot of things together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about next, because I think yeah, it was structural, but it was also a garden. It, like you said, it had this kind of rainwater collection irrigation, so it was circular in that way. The pillars that were holding up the garden had things like phone chargers and seating built in, so it became something that was programmed. And if I understand this correctly, things were like scheduled there. There were lectures and talks and performances there, and so it was not just plants. It was
No,
not just the
it was
structure, but it was also this kind of living
infrastructure.
thing. Yeah. And you in a previous interview, you said that that project was about, and I'm quoting you here, inserting architecture somewhere it doesn't belong. And I love that, because it's a little bit the opposite of what we've just been talking about bringing these other things into architecture. Tell me about that inverse. How do you insert architecture where it doesn't belong and then kind of like push that back out?
Well, I think it's the part that's architectural is, well, you don't need a weird V-shaped, you know,
Yeah.
sort of weird shape,
Yeah.
cantilevered, like I think
You don't need a special skirt
you
to
don't need a
to pick
special skirt to
vegetables.
pick vegetables. You don't need, I think there is a presence to that physical object
Yeah.
that so it's true that the object is organizing all these other things, but you could have had the same thing. You could have food and not had architecture at all,
Yeah. That's interesting.
in a way. So it's kind of bringing the two things together, with the two things are supporting kind of one another. Because in the end, I think we also do try to make things that, I think this is what we write about in the book, that has a certain beauty, or that, I
Yeah.
think that dimension. And
Yeah, it is design that makes it
right.
special.
It is
And
design that
Right.
makes it
Right.
special, and design is what enables this kind of 1 + 1 = 3, or the
Yeah.
feeling that, right,
Yeah.
that you've been
Yeah.
generous to, right, it's not just pure function. You actually have added pleasure and an experience and sensual kind of materiality, and all these this kind of so that I think that's inserting architecture into a system, and then once architecture is there, it can reorganize things in a new and way.
That's actually like very clarifying for me, and just thinking about your work also, because I think you've talked about that project kind of changing the trajectory
Yeah,
of your
yeah,
office. I like that line you just used where it was like you were kind of asserting the kind of architecture that you want to
yeah,
see.
right. That's
How,
what was great about the brief, I think, was
yeah.
that
yeah,
there was no brief. And so we
right.
had, you
So
know,
so I think maybe I'm anticipating, but I think for us that ties to this question, like why would we what how do we decide when to take on a project, or when
Mm,
do we know if a project has reached its potential? I think is if this added dimension is there, like if it
yeah.
clicks and it feels like it's doing something more than the brief we were given. I think we're always looking for that kind of hook, or that um,
Yeah.
and I have to say, when it's not there, we're a little sad. Like
Yeah.
the project falls a little flat. Like we what are we going to be able to say about this project? I don't know.
Right. Right. I mean,
yeah,
I think that's where it connects to the Miami Museum Garage, which is the same, to me, those projects are very much in dialogue, actually, in that you take this, just again, for listeners, you take this sort of 4 foot space around a parking garage and you program it. You put in a DJ booth, you put in places to sit and lounge. And I feel like those ideas come from a lot of the ideas that you were exploring in PF1. Aside from, I hope this is not a reductive question, but aside from recognition, aside from press, how did that project change actually the office? Did your approach to projects change? Like, is
Yeah,
that really where this
yeah. I
idea
mean,
oh,
of
I
the
yeah,
think
yeah,
something
yeah.
it
extra?
didn't change the trajectory. There was no
There was
trajectory before. Like it was the start
It
of,
gave it a trajectory.
Yeah,
yes,
Yeah.
for
definitely,
sure.
definitely. Yeah. I mean, and we were very conscious of that because uh and we write it in the book. We were
For,
kind of the first book, we were kind of like, okay, like we're going to try to figure out what we're doing here by, taking on every single project that we can, and just like doing
hmm
it.
hmm
Somehow something is going to show up.
hmm
And that's very hard, actually. And we felt like what was showing up was weirdly more in our teaching. We didn't realize that would, right, that
Mhm.
would happen. Um, and so I think PF1 was like, okay, we have a chance to like
hmm
make something that defines what we imagine architecture can do. And it became like a benchmark, or like
mm,
once you do that, you're like, okay, well, this is the best, right? This is what architecture can do at its best, right? And so it gave a trajectory, but also gave a sort of sense of like, that's what you should be looking for.
yeah. I have one other question about PF1. I don't want this whole conversation to be based in 2008, but I got to New York a couple years later, so I never actually saw it in real
Yeah.
life. My encounter with PF1 was through the great book that you published with Adam Michaels, Inventory Books, which then became Inventory Press.
Right.
His series of kind of these experimental
You were
paperbacks.
just saying nobody read.
Yeah,
So
Um,
exactly.
I I
Nice.
I love this book. I actually think this book is like one of the best books on like the creative process and all the unseen labor that goes into producing a project of that scale. But I think there's lessons for going from concept to actually something real. I think this book does a great job of showing that intellectual and physical labor really well, because it's this oral history of this project. And I'm wondering if, and the other thing that I like about this book is how little your own voices are in it. It is the
Right.
gardeners, it is the contractors, it is the engineers. Did producing that book, reflecting on that, did that teach you anything about the project that you were not aware of as it was happening, or did it change how you thought about that work?
The book came about very quickly after we finished the project. I think we really wanted to get everything down because it was such a special experience. And like, I think a little bit we were afraid it would never happen again, like we
Yeah.
would never do anything ever again. Because we were also very tired, but we kind of, and I think everybody was just so pumped that
Mhm.
everybody wanted to talk about it too. So
Mm,
um, I think I mean for me, because I spent a lot of time with Heather editing. We had huge amounts of interviews,
I
and
bet.
and I think what I what I learned was more about the book. I think like it was so fun to take thousands of pages and try to like make a trajectory. It was like writing a film.
Mm,
I mean,
yeah.
we wanted it to be about the creative process and to like and to have like tension and
I was
like
gonna say it's
you know,
propulsive. You want to like. I
exactly,
know it works out, but
exactly.
I'm on
So
the
I
edge
mean,
of my
I
seat.
think, yeah, I mean, I don't know that is what I remember from the
Mhm.
book more than anything else.
I think
But it was fun. It was really fun to find out what everybody else was thinking.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
everybody had their, it goes back a little bit to what I was saying about maybe pop or the ability for everybody to read something completely different way and in their own way. And you've got all these, multiple layers and, like many of the people working on it had no idea that, you know, or it wasn't relevant to them that this idea was related to, I don't know, Super Studio or
Yeah.
right, or that it was had an urban dimension, or right. I think everybody kind of understood it, and with through their own kind of lens. And I think that's what's great is that you come together, uh, not just. I mean, obviously, food helps, right? Because
Yeah.
it's harder to do that through architecture, but like if you can do that through architecture, then that's yeah, that's the ideal.
I think it's interesting. We're talking about a book that you published about 10, like 15 years ago. I guess we started this conversation talking about your new book. You have your other book that has come up a couple times. You have your 49 Cities book that's been mentioned. We haven't really talked about, but that's another book. Amal, you did the Architecture and Representation in the Arab City book. I watched a talk, Amal, that you gave at MIT a couple years ago where you started by showing all the books that the studio has published first before showing any buildings. What is the role of publishing in your process, in your output, in the studio? It seems to be an important part of how you work is also documenting these ideas and publishing these ideas. How do you think about this idea of publishing or books as a part of work, AC?
There is a little bit the kind of genealogy
For
from OMA and REM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was, that was an office. If there was no book, there was no project, right? Like
Mm,
where's the book of the
yeah.
project? Because in the book, you had everything that mattered and the argument and the story and all of that. So I do think that obsession with making books from, of projects, I think is still there, and it's become PDFs and presentations and kind of very structured. Uh, but I think the real books, so not the project books, but the real books, I think, um, sometimes it's like uh, we went to our daughter's curriculum night, and she has this great English teacher now, and he was like, the
poetry teacher.
poetry, and he was like, well, not that we do poetry, but he said, when I have a student who says, my idea is, and he'd be like, oh, that's too bad, right? Because right, uh, I do think that making the books allows us to discover or to put our thoughts
Yeah.
uh, to discover what it is we're looking at or looking for at a certain moment.
Yeah.
I think even building for people and plants, which started as like, well, let's just make a coffee table book, like no ambition, just a beautiful project with like beautiful pictures. But in the end, I think the essays and the interview and Nicola's essay
Yeah.
and working with Sonia Dakova, the graphic design, I think we also learned a lot. Like we articulated things in a new way. I don't think
Yeah.
so I think it is a process through which you make sense of what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, because the other thing that he said, the poetry teacher, was, writing, most people think writing is for communication, but writing is to figure out something,
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
figure out a problem or to understand something.
Right.
And I think
I think
that's why people write. And I think,
we still do it for that
yeah,
reason.
yeah. And for me, it's also like, that is also why we design, you're right? Like why we do projects is to figure out things. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. And maybe I'm showing my bias as a graphic designer here, but hearing you talk about the books makes me think, is the book for you just another scale? Like it's actually like book, interior, building, urbanism.
Yeah.
Like, is that
Yeah,
actually another type of design
it
project
is for
for you in
sure.
some way?
For sure, it
Yeah.
is. And I think it's never been what was great about buildings for people and plants is, yeah, the process of designing it with Sonia and Tom and Julie from Park Books and was such a,
Daniel too.
and Daniel was such an amazing collaboration. It was fun. Like the
Yeah.
book becomes its own thing, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a project and it has its own um, demands in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and the book is listed on your website under the built
Yeah.
category,
Yeah. It's built.
right with the other buildings. I have just a couple more, a handful of kind of
Yeah.
quick questions to as we start to wrap up. But thinking about this idea of publishing or writing and kind of how you're working through things, I want to very briefly. I'll talk about your time as dean at Columbia. You were dean from 2014 to 2021, and I'm from what it sounds like, that seems like it was sort of an unexpected thing. You had joined the faculty just a couple years earlier, tenure track, suddenly
Yeah.
you're dean. How did being in that position and doing that work and
Yeah.
everything that comes with dean, curriculum, administration,
Yeah.
budgets, how did that influence work AC, or
Yeah.
how did that start to actually filter back into the studio work?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, well, a few things. One is, oddly enough, I felt like it made me a better architect.
Oh,
Uh, I'm not sure if it's uh, just mm, seeing things faster. Like you have to operate. It's almost like becoming a parent makes you better at what you
yeah,
do. You
yeah,
have less
yeah.
time. And you just bet. Everybody's like, oh my God, how am I going to do it? And you're like, no, you're just going to get better at it.
Yep,
And
yep.
I felt like it was the same thing. Like I was dealing with so many things. Uh, so, a lot of problem solving, a lot of designing the institutions, a lot of,
Mhm.
so that there's that aspect where I felt like I matured faster. And I mean,
That's interesting. Yeah.
whatever gap there was between Dan and I, Dan had much more experience than I did. And, so I feel like becoming dean was a way to catch up with Dan,
Oh,
maybe
interesting.
a little bit, or,
And I
just,
was taking care of the kids, so I was also becoming the
yeah, we kind of defamiliarized our
Yeah.
position to kind of reconstitute. So on a personal note, I think there was a little bit of that. But otherwise, I also think that it did bring a lot of a super interesting experience uh, in terms of systems, right? An institution
Right.
is system design, and for better or for worse, I really understand both the pros and the cons and the
Mm,
gaps and strength of institutions, and we're interested in working with institutions and thinking about them. So I think there is that dimension as well. So yeah, I think if it doesn't kill your practice, it can make it stronger.
Were you able to stay involved in the day to
I mean, not
day?
the first 2, 3 years were very difficult. In
Yeah,
fact,
I
I
bet.
think at some point Dan, kind of sort of brought down the ultimatum.
Yeah, because
Uh,
we were doing nice things and she did not like them because she wasn't involved in them.
it's not because I wasn't.
They were,
Right.
Right.
yeah,
So then it became a question of discipline and being like,
I understand. Yeah.
these are the days I'm at school and these are the days I'm at the office. And we did shrink a little bit, but we figured out. So no, I don't think I wasn't as involved as I am now, but it was pretty good.
pretty
Yeah.
good by the
Yeah.
end.
By
Yeah.
the end, yeah. Before COVID, I had reached a balance and then COVID hit and
Yeah. Yeah. We all get that.
all
Yeah.
started from zero,
Yeah.
basically.
Going back to this idea of the body of work question that I started with, and the intellectual or conceptual ambition of the office, the concerns of the office. How did that, or did it at all, did those things overlap with the concerns of Columbia, where you have a diverse student population, a diverse faculty population? They're all bringing their research interests and questions in. Were you able to find overlaps there, or was
I mean,
things
it
coming from
wasn't
your faculty coming back in? Like, how did those start to talk to each other, if at all?
not it wasn't that important to me that the two be so overlapped.
Yeah.
I felt like, my interest I can carry through my practice and my teaching. As dean, it's about making visible the entrance, the interests that are bubbling up
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
below, while giving some direction. I do think that like climate change and ecology
Right.
is very strong. I tried to make it a strong direction. It took a while. Also kind of this question of decentering the field and getting more voices from
Yeah.
kind of around the
Yeah.
world and more women. And that, like from the beginning, I think there was this sort of like desire to expand, to sort of support a variety of voices. But that was about the school. It wasn't so much trying to fit the office and the. In fact, I liked to keep them separate. It's like, okay, now I'm
Yeah.
lecturing.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning, I would get confused. I would be invited to lecture, and I would do half, like half Columbia and half about the office, and then people were like, "Whoa, like what?" Like, and so then I was like, "Okay, you're inviting me as dean, or are you inviting me as
Oh,
work at
interesting.
sea?" And just making the two very, very separate. It was much better and easier. Yeah.
Uh, I've asked this question to many deans. This is the last question about
Yeah.
your time there, but again, I'm struck by the range of project types that we've talked about: the scale, the ambition, the program, the book, the interior, the city. Is running a architecture school, is that also a design project? Was that like, were
I
you
mean,
able to kind of treat it as a project?
I think it is a design project. Unfortunately, it is less and less a design project, and
Mm,
that is sad, because there is a loss of autonomy in terms of the schools, all the schools, in terms of the kinds of direction that faculty and deans can bring to the, everything is
yeah.
like very top down right now, extremely controlled. And so I think unfortunately, and as an architect dean, you have ideas about design. As a trustee, you have idea about the budget. Like,
Oh, right.
okay, the
Yeah.
values are different. So it is a design project, or it was, and now it's less interesting.
And you have to negotiate those different positions all the time. Am I this as administrator? Am I this as architect? Am I this as kind
I
of
think I think you
vision?
can I think you can negotiate them very easily as long as you have some autonomy. But I think the moment that autonomy is eroded, you might as well be an AI implemented, lowest risk.
Yeah. I think that what's what you're forgetting is that you designed this physical the
Yeah, yeah,
the physical
right.
school GSAP never looked better. It was she really
Yeah,
you really thought about the places where people were going to get together. You invented new places within the school,
yeah,
and even though we weren't, it wasn't Work AC projects. She had to
yeah.
hire
It
Mm,
was my
architects,
phone. Yeah,
but it was clear that someone was thinking about physical spaces in a building where, it's not a great,
no,
it needs a lot of love. And I think it really came a long way.
yeah,
So,
that's true. Thank
yeah.
you.
are you both still teaching right now?
I'm back on the faculty. I'm teaching,
Okay.
and
Right.
Dan is taking a break
For 15
and
years.
is fomenting new projects.
Yes. New,
Okay. All right.
new
We'll
new
come back to that
institutional.
then. Because I've read that you sort of did not want to be like academic architects, that when you were starting
Yeah.
Work AC, that was something you wanted to stay away from. And then you both got into teaching fairly early. Obviously, your time as dean was probably heavily academic. Um, what is that relationship between academia and practice for you today? What does that actually kind of look like on a day-to-day level?
Um, I think for a long time, um, we brought to teaching. I think we still bring to teaching questions that we have, uh, either about the practice or about uh, something in the world, or about, like, right now my design studio is to imagine a new Arab American
Mhm.
museum in lower Manhattan on the west side, where the first Arabs immigrated, and there's a whole history that is very little known on in West Washington Street. And so I'm kind of interested in, the turn of the century, and making parallels with some of the uh, I find some of the kind of cultural vibrancy that's happening. So yeah, so I think we bring, like,
Yeah.
we're not designing that now, but it's something that I'm interested in. So, and I think similarly,
Yeah.
Dan has done amazing
Right.
studios.
But for me, it's always less about I mean, yeah, it's so fun to research new things and like every
Yeah.
year challenge myself to kind of think of something completely different. But it's also, I think, what's great about teaching studio is the practice at thinking and thinking quickly and thinking,
Mhm.
thinking for so many people, and I mean, it's like the students are kind of like clients, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
not, they're kind of bringing their own, you want each one to have their own idea, but you kind of have to help them along. And, it's like, what's in it for the chess grandmaster to play like 20 people blindfolded, right? He's not going to learn anything about any of their games, but like just to do 20 blindfolded
It's good
is good
practice.
practice. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so,
That's a good way to put that. Actually, um, as somebody who's like now fully in academia for the first time, I'm like,
Yeah,
that was a very selfish question that I'm trying to negotiate now.
yeah,
Um, I want to end with one more question that I actually want to draw from the We'll Get There When We Cross That Bridge book. You have this great line in the beginning when you're sort of outlining your values, outlining uh, kind of your principles, or the things that drive your work, that in a weird way I think summarizes a lot of what this conversation became. Um, you write that you want to insist that architecture's most beautiful quality is the fragility of its foundations, which demand that the shared ground for its understanding be constantly reconstituted. And I love that because it sort of acknowledges the blurriness of architecture, of what architecture can be, of where it can go. I also think that weirdly is a nice articulation of your practice and everything we've talked about.
yeah,
Yes, there's a coherent body of work, but it's across scales, it's across types, it's across programs. I won't comment on the fragility of your foundations, but I like how Work AC is also constantly reconstituting itself. And I'm wondering if we can use this idea to talk about what's interesting to you right now. Amal, you've hinted at, the studio you're working on and some of the things you're thinking about. You said Dan is like starting some new projects, but Where does all this go? What's interesting to you? What's on your mind right now? Where do all these ideas kind of go next, especially with this book that's just wrapped up collecting a body of work?
I don't know where it goes. Yeah.
All
I
right, we're
think
done. That's it.
no, I think I feel like we're in a moment of floating again a little
Mm,
bit, to be honest. I think that the political context in, I mean, the world, but also especially the US, and is very unnerving
mhm.
to try to kind of understand. I think we're kind of floating a little bit, like and just letting things come a little bit and
Mm.
operating a little bit. The foundations don't feel strong right now. You know, I mean,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't mean it negatively. I just mean uh, like I don't know. We're not taking for granted
Yeah.
what is here right now, and
Right. But
so
you said we're floating again. I think that's very appropriate. I think there are periods where we're floating and periods where we're not, where
right,
we know where we're
Mm.
going.
right, yeah,
And I think it's funny because it almost like if someone said, "Oh, we'd love Workasi to do another book right away," like there's no way, there's no book
there's no book,
yet
zero.
ready. This book, I mean, I have a folder from like right, 3 years after the last one that's
Mm,
called Buildings Book, where we started, and I think it's kind of like yeah, and the first in that book we had these 5 year plans, and those
Right.
plans they were not from the year one. They are always from year three,
yeah,
or
Right.
four sometimes, where it's like, oh, now we know what we're doing now. That is the title too. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
cross the bridge first.
but, but you
But
had,
I do, yeah. I mean, we're thinking of expanding the office for the first time and
Mm.
overseas branch, which is, I think, really exciting. And then, yeah, we have this extra space, and I have been complaining about the lack of architecture exhibitions that are about architects and architecture, living architects. And so, we want to start a kind of space to show
Oh, I love
architects.
that.
And but it's hard because I want to make it very scrappy and like let's just do it. And I guess there's a lot of work into having a gallery. I don't know. This is more than I thought. I thought it's like just buy a label machine and let's go.
yeah,
Uh,
Hang some things on walls. Yeah.
but we're going to try to make it as scrappy as we can.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, a floating moment.
Yeah. I love that. But it's also sounds like there's some intentional floating in there too. There's
Yeah.
some
Yeah, yeah,
ideas. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, we are, it's like we always used to kind of joke and talk about how the age of an architect, you're a young architect, well past the time when you were a young person, but still a young architect. And I do, and also the confidence that you can get from being a young architect, knowing that you don't have to worry about
right.
it until you're a grandfather, and so a grandparent. But now, kind of like here on this side of the bridge, you see like things are easier. It's easier to design stuff and right? I mean, it's like we have 20 years of shared language and
yeah. It is, but it's hard to find the right projects, and it's hard to find the
it
right
is.
context, and you realize that context matters, and not you don't have the same opportunities or um, um, yeah, I think where you are or where you're practicing now matters, and I think that's a bit the question. So Dan said overseas. I mean, we're thinking about opening an office in Beirut of all
Mhm.
places, which is, ex sounds extremely smart, but like, but we I don't know, we want to test it out. We have a lot of work there. Maybe it can
Yeah.
become a platform for Europe. We have a lot of work in Albania. Um, I don't know, we feel like maybe this is a moment to try it out. So yeah, it's floating with some experiments. Yeah.
I think that's a really nice way to end this conversation. I'm such a fan of the way you both think and talk about your work, and it was really nice to talk through some of this thought process with you today. Amale and Dan, thanks so much for being on the show. This was such a pleasure.
It was really fun. We don't
great.
do it often, so we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the questions and for actually reading. That's that's really kind of really nice.
That was my conversation with Work AC's Amale Andraos and Dan Wood. Their new book is called Buildings for People and Plants. Our theme music is by Jeremiah Chu. The show is funded thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. If you like what we're doing, I hope you consider supporting us and get some bonus content each month. You can follow us across social media at Surface Podcast, and you can listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.